welcome. This is Sandra Hess, Executive Director of the Calaveras Winegrape Alliance. And I have the honor of sitting today with Mark Chandler, who was just a pivotal part of the Calaveras wine industry in the formative years and is still a very big part of the California wine industry today. So, welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Sandra. Happy to be here.
Excellent. So, in our ongoing series of the history of Calaveras wine, today we're going to learn about how Mark came to know the Calaveras wine region. So, Mark, if you'd like to maybe open it up with an introduction and let us know what originally brought you to the Calaveras wine region.
Well, I had been working in the wine industry since my graduating days from Cal Poly in 1978. From 1980 to 85, I was a winemaker in British Columbia and learned a lot about the business up there. Got tired of wet summers and moved back to California. I'm a seventh generation Californian, so it was hard to leave. And I was working in San Luis Obispo, answered an ad in one of the trade papers for a production manager up at this little winery in Calaveras County called Stephen O. Winery. I got a phone call from Barden and he said, you know, I'd really like to, let's talk. And I said, okay, let's talk. And he said, no, I want you to come up to my ranch and spend the night and we'll go out to dinner. And this story is similar to what you heard from Brian Clausen, what you heard from Steve Millier. Barden was a very hospitable person. I drove up there with my wife. We stayed at the Shaw Ranch, went out to dinner at Il Refugio. And by the next morning, he made me a job offer. And on my 5-hour trip back to San Luis Obispo, I convinced my wife that it would be a good move. And that was in the early fall of 1985. And I got to work up at the winery and got to know all the staff there. Steve and Liz Millier, Carrie Shin was the secretary, bookkeeper there at the time. Chuck Hubby was there and lots of other really great people. It was a great team. And curious story, about a month after I started there, Barden was up in Wyoming hiking with some friends in the mountains. He had a heart attack and he was laid low. He called us at the winery a few days later. And when I got on the line, he said, Mark, you're going to have to take over because I can't do it. And, you know, do the best, run the place the best you can. And, you know, I'll be back. He didn't come back for about 3 weeks. But the team there was so congealed and knew what they were doing that we were able to bring it off without a hitch. And that was my early days in Calaveras County. Barden arranged for a friend of his who owned some rentals for us to rent a house. And then true to Barden's spirit, people have talked about him supporting the tourism industry. He bought a house that was right next to his mother's house in Angels Camp. And he hired a couple of very colorful guys to renovate the house. And we turned it into a bed and breakfast inn. It's called the Cooper House. It's still operating today. It was a dentist that had his practice there. And so he created a job for my wife to work alongside me as we spent our time in Calaveras County. So it was a very Barden thing to do.
You know, that's a great story, Mark. And, you know, you talk a lot about the early prospectors of Calaveras wine country, the Milliers and Chuck Hovey and others. And I love that you talk about also how entrepreneurial Barden was. And this is the theme that I've been hearing about in my previous discussions. You know, he was able to pivot quickly. He was able to arrange the houses, get things together as needed, and continue to drive forward progress.
Right as I was beginning to work at Stephen O. Winery, Barden had been very successful at getting an account, a large restaurant, national restaurant chain, put in an order for 30,000 cases of white Zinfandel. This is like 1984, right before I got there. And so Barden and Steve arranged all the grape contracts. They bought the grapes, crushed the grapes, made the wine. And before the first case was sold, the contract got canceled because the guy at the restaurant chain got fired. So talk about pivot. We have 30,000 cases of a wine that has about a 6 to 9 month shelf life. And Liz got very creative. We all got very creative. And actually, to accommodate that production, Barden, the old winery building, he put it up on jacks and moved it about 50 yards down into the field and then built a whole new facility to manage all this new volume that was going to come through the place, and the contract got canceled.
Wow.
So it just shows you his entrepreneurial spirit where, he had to ramp up production. I'm going to build a new building. He acted as his own general contractor and got it done. And then, of course, it launched us into a whole new volume set, and it forced us to put a lot more wine through the national distribution channel he had already built up. But he was truly an entrepreneur's entrepreneur. And he brought to the wine industry in Calaveras County all the financial resources that he had generated from a very successful real estate career in San Francisco, successful mining operation, and he dedicated that to the Calaveras County wine industry, and it's just a fantastic story.
It is a fantastic story that Barton Steveno lived his life with passion, with intention, and you hear from others, Steve Millier and Judith Marvin, about his adventurous spirit and his enjoyment of the outdoors as well. And I think Calaveras wine country gave him a beautiful tapestry, a beautiful space where he could truly be the creator he intended to be. And so it's wonderful to hear your stories and memories of Barton as well. So obviously, my next question for you might be about Barton, but I'm curious. I know that you have your own vineyards outside of Lodi and Lockford areas, and obviously you've been a big part of the California wine industry for years. But what initially interested you? Who inspired you early on?
When I went to Cal Poly, I was getting a degree in agricultural business management. I didn't know exactly how I was going to put it to use. I originally started out in the grain business with Cargill Grain Company, a wonderful company. I was bored to tears. And I went up to British Columbia, got married to a Canadian lady there, and I was on a winery tour. And I had sold wine as a waiter in a restaurant in Atascadero for 2 years when I was at Cal Poly, and I thought this might be a good career path. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really get to express that until I moved to British Columbia, went on a winery tour at a winery there, and I stopped by the front desk and said, "Are there any jobs open?" And there happened to be a job open for a quality control technician in the lab, and the general manager was a guy that was very pro-American. He was Canadian, but he was very pro-American. We hit it off. I worked at that winery for 5 years, Andres Wines in British Columbia. Wonderful background in production. I always wanted to be in marketing, but that 5 years set me up so well. I knew the product so well that when I ended up in the marketing world and going on the East Coast to represent Steveno Wines and talking with all those liquor store owners and so forth, when you know the banter, you establish credibility right away. And that was how I got started in the wine business. And of course, it's 35 years later and I'm still doing it. So I spent a wonderful 30 years here in Lodi, ran the Lodi Winegrape Commission. And along the way, my wife and I invested in vineyards, and that's our primary focus now is vineyards. And we have a little wine brand of our own too.
And that name is?
Burlington Chandler Wines. Her maiden name is Burlington. She won that argument. So it's Burlington Chandler Wines, but we have Malbec, Rosé of Malbec, Cabernet Sauvignon, and it's small, but it's growing rapidly, and we're really excited about particularly the direct-to-consumer channel, which you're an expert in. My son works for wine.com, and I think there's a pretty good opportunity there. So
congratulations. And one of these days, I'd love to taste some of that Malbec, especially. And so, you talk about the wines of BC, and I'm familiar with that region. I've had the opportunity to travel throughout many of the wine regions in Canada. And, this brings me to my next question about the unique nuances, the unique aspects of the Calaveras wine region and how that compares to other wine regions. And I think about the Okanagan, and I think about these beautiful areas that are truly family owned and operated, that are handcrafted. It's all about the authentic experience. And so, what would you say when you think about the Calaveras wine region and you're telling a best friend about it? What does that sound like?
Mentioning these other areas, all of the wine regions, and I've worked with dozens of them, we're all in a state of becoming. And we all have origins that are wonderful histories. And we're now at a phase of development where we've kind of got our legs and we're getting a reputation for ourselves. And Calaveras County is very much in that mode. And I'm going to backtrack in a moment about how Barton helped the marketing and the recognition of Calaveras County. But it's really fun to watch these regions over the course of literally now a generation or a generation and a half. And I'm so excited about the new generation coming on. Scott Clan talked about it in one of his sessions, but especially here in Lodi, I see the new generation coming on. I'm so thrilled about their dedication, um, the experience they've had growing up in these family operations. And I see that very much in Calaveras County. You're developing the tourism aspect. You have also the diversity of varieties. Similar to Lodi, you can grow anything there, and we can pretty much grow anything here because our climate is not too hot and not too cold. If you're in a European wine region, you're defined by your climate. You're defined by a cold region, you're going to do Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. In the warmer regions, they're going to do, down in Italy, they're going to do Sangiovese. And in Spain, they're going to do Tempranillo. But we're not defined by any of those parameters. And so also in America, we have this pioneering spirit. In Europe, the regulations are so heavy, the government tells you what vines you're going to plant in what area, how many vines per acre, and if you can water them or not. I used to have students come through from Europe often in Lodi and ask us about the regulatory environment. And I said, we're free to make our own mistakes. And so, and there it is. And you talk about people like Chuck Hubby that pioneered Tempranillo and the Spanish varieties in that area. And I know it had an impact on us here in Lodi. We have lots of Tempranillo. We have a wide range of varieties. And that's a selling feature. We're not just all Cabernet and Chardonnay. And so it's endlessly stimulating to visitors to come enjoy that. Brian Clausen mentioned in one of your interviews about how Barden was associated with some Sonoma County wineries. And really, we talk about Barden in terms of the vineyards and the wines, but he was a marketing genius. And he brought that experience to Calaveras Wine. And the group that he was associated with that Brian mentioned was called Winery Associates. And it was a very new concept. This is early 1980s. In the wine business, we are what we call a three-tier system. There's the winery, there's the distributor, and there's the retailer who sells to the customer. And nowadays, there's the direct-to-consumer channel, which you're so expert at, which didn't exist back then. But these fellows got together and created a fourth tier. It was between the winery and the distributor. It's a sales agency, and Barden was so smart. I think his real estate background informed him. You know, part of real estate investment is to buy a modest home in a really nice neighborhood because those other homes add value to your property. So he associated himself with people like Dry Creek Vineyards, Pedroncelli, Wheeler. I wrote down the list here, Murphy Good, and Lou Preston. I mean, these were all stables of the Dry Creek area. And they would take their wines and go to wine shows all around the country. And here's this set of Sonoma County wines. And by the way, here's Calaveras. And he really created a lot of awareness for Calaveras. And to Brian Clausen's point about differentiation, there were all those Sonoma wines, but here's something different. This is Calaveras County. This is the foothills. This is gold country. And he opened doors that other people have been able to walk through. I went for many years while I was at Stephen O. One of my responsibilities was go market on the East Coast, and I would spend weeks at a time in Boston and New York and Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia. And I was walking in the footsteps of Barden Stephen O. And it was a lot of fun and a great learning experience. And like I say, it opened doors of opportunity for the people that have followed.
And that says a lot about who he was. And it says a lot about, your perspective also. And that is, it's not just about planting the grapes, making the wine, enjoying the wine and repeat. I really, in these interviews, have heard the spirit of Barden Stephen was really about wine enjoyment and presenting the wine to a variety of individuals. That meant sometimes getting out of his box and going out and traveling and
Yeah,
being with his sales reps and distributor reps. And I just think there's a lot to be said as I look at great wine families today who have taken that same approach. You have that spirit of entrepreneurialism as well, where I think it's about that experience. It's about taking it beyond, the winery and the tasting room and saying, we want to make sure that people really connect to something special in what we've created.
absolutely. And, Barden went on the road and Chuck went on the road. And when I came along, I took most of those responsibilities off of those guys. And the restaurants are so critical because restaurant placement is important in terms of the volume of wine you're going to sell. But even if the client doesn't buy your wine, they see your wine on the list. And so it's advertising, it's creating awareness. And that was what, Barden pioneered for the rest of other people in Calaveras. It was fun.
I'm sure it was. Well, when we think back about, where did we come from in the Calaveras wine region? Here we are, harvest season 2020, getting into the middle of October here. We're getting a little bit of a chill in the air at last and really feeling the beautiful spirit of harvest as we've just wrapped up our 27th annual Grape Stomp and harvest celebration. And obviously this year, because of pandemic, we did that virtually. Where we've come from, 1851, first grapes planted in the Calaveras River area. You think about the humble beginnings of our settlers and prospecting spirits of the gold rush era here. You think about people like Steve and Liz Milliere, who helped found the Calaveras Winegrape Alliance in 1986, and now 40 tasting rooms strong across Calaveras wine country. I am honored to say that I support a region that is still family owned and focused on keeping the conversation intimate and keeping it educational and high touch with our residents and visitors alike.
You're describing with the family-owned operations and in some cases many generations gives consumers a sense of authenticity. When you go to Calaveras County, you're being greeted by the guy who was on the tractor back when the vines were being planted and the person that probably pruned the vines and crushed the grapes and made the wine. And that's a level of authenticity that you just don't get elsewhere. And that speaks to just about every operation that I've been familiar with there, from Barden and Gay Callan and what the Couches have done and what the Millieres have done and what Chuck did. And it's, that's a distinguishing feature there. So I really learned a lot from watching your series about the people who have come since I've not been closely associated. I left the area in 1990. So I've been tangentially involved, but just to see the development, I think people are going to continue to discover it. I think people are going to continue to escape from the Bay Area, and those baby boomers that are finished with their career and they sell their home in the Bay Area, they're going to want to come up there and enjoy the mountain life, and they're going to help spread the word about Calaveras wines.
Sure. And so speaking of, escaping and the enjoyment of Calaveras wine country, what are some of your favorite things to do here?
My wife and I have come up several times recently. We'll stay in a B&B and wander up and down. Murphy's is such a treat compared to what it was when I was there. And also we go up and we hike around Big Trees. We go skiing, up at Bear Valley, and we have friends that have property up there, cabins where we can stay. Calaveras County is, fortunately for me, it's an hour and a half away. So you can enjoy all that nature, the fly fishing that Barden was so passionate about. It's all right there. And so it's within a reasonable proximity of the Bay Area. People can get there in a couple of hours. So I think the future is very bright.
Well, thank you for that, Mark. And as we wrap up in our time together today, I would love to hear from you. And this is a question that I've been asking all of my special guests. What is your vision or wishes for the future of the Calaveras wine region?
I think that you've got a tremendous opportunity as the new generations begin to take over from some of us who have, spent decades in the industry there, and the diversity of the crops that you have, and the tourism development is something that's absolutely fantastic. And that also goes clear back to Barden's days. About a month before he passed, I got to visit with him on his porch, and I asked him what he was proudest of. And he said, I'm proudest of not just in the context of the jobs he created, but he had the ski resort that he worked on. He had the mining industry, he had the winery. And he said, I'm really proud of all the hundreds of people that I employed all those years. And every other Friday, those people went home with a paycheck. They could pay their rent, they could put food on the table for their kids and clothes on their back for when they went to school. And that was the heart and soul of Barden. And I think that will carry on through into the future as the wine and tourism industry develops in Calaveras County.
I appreciate that. And, as we start to prepare for our time with loved ones this Thanksgiving season, and we think about traditions, were there traditions that Barden, was really about?
Well, Barden was very hospitable. He brought a lot of people to Calaveras County to stay in his home. And I will say, Barden was one of those special people in your life that every moment is a treasure. And it was so great to spend time with him. He dated some of the most interesting women that you'll ever meet. And he married the most wonderful one, Annie, and he was so proud of that relationship. And so when he brought people up from San Francisco or from distributors from New Jersey or whatever it was, they got first class hospitality at his home. And you've met some of his other friends that worked as caterers or hospitality people for him. His brand of hospitality was so unique and so enveloping. You just felt welcome from the very first moment. So I think that's a value that still is imbued in the Calaveras County experience.
I would agree with that. And as a matter of fact, the next time you're in the Calaveras wine region, Mark, I'd love to sit down and share a glass of your beautiful Malbec with you and catch up on some good times.
I would be happy to. And one closing comment that Gay is probably going to kill me, but it never came up in any of the conversations earlier. Barden and Gay helped establish that vineyard back in the late 1970s. They were dating at a time. They were an item. And a very well-known grape grower in Amador County, who supplied a lot of wineries in Calaveras before the grapes were available in Calaveras, told me that when Barden and Gay walked into a room, the place went electric. And knowing Gay as you do and knowing Barden as I did, you can imagine what that was like. So
Wow, I can't even imagine. I mean, how beautiful that must have been. I've so enjoyed our time together today, Mark, and thank you for that little tidbit of about Gay and Barden. I'm definitely gonna have to circle back with her on that.
I had to toss that in there. But I'll bring up a bottle of the Malbec and we'll have a little taste.
Thank you so much. Wishing you and your family well. Look forward to seeing you soon. Cheers.
Thank you, Sandra.